people to the room. I will start right at 6:30 with just a minute away with a short welcome, and then I'm going to turn it pretty promptly over to Pam and to Jim here. All right. So I'm going to put myself on mute and let's go ahead and open the waiting room. I can't see the participant list with the screen shared right now. You can actually just stop sharing the screen for a second. We'll open the waiting room and then go from there. Okay, I'm admitting everybody.
I'm going to screen share and then let me know if you can see the people who keep coming in. I guess I can see them. That's maybe what I can keep entering them.
Great. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Lara Fowler. I'm with Penn State Law and Penn State Institutes of Energy and Environment. I promised that we would start promptly at 6:30. We realized that people are busy with a lot on their plates. We wanted to welcome everybody to a public forum on addressing climate impacts here in the Center region. We have a number of people who are still joining us, and we very much welcome you to this forum this evening. The purpose of this forum is to have an open discussion about climate impacts, but also opportunities here in this area. And I'm going to turn it over to Pam Adams and Jim May from the Council of Governments to talk about what is happening with the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. During the course of the evening here, this is my welcome and purpose. They're going to talk about the climate action and planning. I'm going to give a little bit of guidance for the breakout rooms, where you're going to be split into groups of about 10 to 12 people, facilitated by students in my environmental mediation course. For all my students, can you wave at everybody? So a whole bunch of folks here. We have 30 students, and so there'll be 2 people facilitating each breakout room for 45 minutes. We'll report back, have a little bit of Q&A and discussion, summarize where we're going and next steps, and we will end promptly at 8:30. A few quick ground rules for the discussion tonight. One, CNET is recording the general sessions, but will not be recording during the breakout. 2, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. If you want to add your pronouns to your name, you have the permission to go ahead and rename yourself. We also encourage, particularly during the breakout session, for you to be as candid as possible, share your thoughts, but we're also trying to make sure everybody has a chance to share their perspectives. So please think about what you're saying, convey it. We're using both the chat function and the opportunity for people to talk with each other, but asking people to be respectful. And I've given all the students and all the facilitators full permission to remove people if something is disruptive. So we want to have a conversation. We want to hear from everybody, and we want to move this forward. With that, I'm going to turn this to Pam and Jim. Pam, go ahead and take it away.
I think it's me, Laura. So this is Jim. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim May, the director of the Center Regional Planning Agency. And I too want to welcome you to the Climate Action Forum this meeting. As Lara mentioned, we have some interactive and engaging breakout sessions led by the students this evening. We're grateful for your time and your active participation in the forum. We look forward to hearing from each of you tonight. According to a 2019 survey from the Pew Research Center, about 60% of survey respondents in the United States saw global climate change affecting their local community, and they're taking action, specific action in their daily lives to mitigate that impact. Tonight, we're going to ask you to think along the same lines, to look at a changing climate at a local level, what you see happening here in your central Pennsylvania backyard, and how to potentially address those issues. Maybe some of you have seen some of those local changes and maybe you have not. And I just want to recognize that we know there are political and ideological differences on the topic of climate change. We want to hear from all of you. And we're just asking that you give each other the space to say what's on your mind. Whether you agree or disagree, please listen to each other without judgment and without malice. We hope to use your input to inform how we can prepare a climate action plan that makes a difference in the place where we live. Local actions are one of the most important ways we can bring lasting and positive change that will help mitigate some of the impacts of climate change where we live. And your responses to the question in the breakout room will help provide invaluable information to help us inform how the Center Region municipalities can move forward with this plan. The climate in central Pennsylvania is expected to continue changing for decades. There certainly is risk to the places that we cherish today. The way we farm, what we farm, if you're a hunter, how we protect habitat, where our energy comes from, how we protect roads and other private investment from damage, from flooding and other weather events, and how we can protect water quality, among other things. That will all continue to change and challenge us in the future. There's a lot to think about and a lot to plan for. And again, I want to thank you for being here this evening and helping us and contributing to our planning process and helping us move this forward. I'm going to hand the forum over to Pam Adams, who will address some of the background and specifics that have been happening in the region, why this matters, and she'll provide some additional information and instructions for the rest of this evening. So thank you again and welcome.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Laura. So I'm really happy that you're all here tonight, and I really wish we could all be in person. So I am really thankful that you've taken your time to spend 2 hours with us on Zoom, and hopefully you'll learn some things and take some things away from this session. So before I get into the details of my presentation, I like sharing this United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I find this slide very relevant because it shows all the different but related pieces to make a community sustainable. Tonight's focus is on climate action, number 13 there, but I wanted to recognize that it does not stand alone. It's really important to understand and recognize all the interconnections. So hopefully you're here tonight because you want to learn about what local government is doing and what we're hoping to accomplish, as well as provide input on what actions are needed. I'm going to speak about climate change in our region in the central Pennsylvania and basically try to highlight some of the impacts that are being felt locally, where elected officials are recognizing that we need to do something to help keep costs under control and help protect the community. There are a lot of things that we could talk about, but we only have 2 hours total, and we want to do less talking and hear more from you. So I'm going to talk about infrastructure, public health, and land use. So for infrastructure, local government is definitely seeing impacts of these extreme rain events. In the last century, Pennsylvania has seen a 55% increase in those extreme rain events. That adds potential costs, and it also affects the safety of our residents. The chart on the top right shows that we're experiencing more power outages. They've doubled in the last decade due to these extreme rain events. So local government needs to help and figure out what we can do to help residents shelter in place longer. And how can we make our infrastructure, the power and energy grid, more reliable? That's sort of the power energy infrastructure, but there's also the transportation infrastructure where we're seeing damages from landslides and flooding. That picture on the right there is Purdue Mountain Road that was closed for 2 years and cost near $1 million after a storm caused it to wash out. So it's these types of things that we're experiencing from these extreme rain events that cost money, but it's also disruptive to homeowners and businesses. So there's also public health issues that come with more rain and more warming temperatures. So the temperatures will continue to be variable year to year, but that average temperature is trending upward. The average annual temperature for the state of Pennsylvania is expected to increase 5.9 degrees by the mid-century. And as the Pennsylvania maps there show on the bottom, the number of days of heat intensive days, which means greater than 90 degrees is how it's defined right now, is expected to increase as well. So the state average from 1970 to 2000 were 5 days. That's for the state, the average, 5 days greater than 90 degrees. By the time we get to mid-century, that average annual number of days greater than 90 is expected to be 31. So this comes along with impacts on our community. Heat increases will affect our elderly, those working outside, student athletes. There's multiple examples. And you might recall in 2018, when Coral Street had its delay opening because of a mold remediation problem. So those are things that are happening in our community that are impacting cost as well as services. Another significant public health issue is Lyme disease rates. So as you can see from these two charts, 1996 to 2018, Lyme disease cases have really grown in the Northeast. In Center County alone, our Lyme disease cases have grown 7 times in the last decade. So this is a public health issue that we need to work as a community to help make our residents safer. The final area I want to talk about is land use. So this map shows land use in 2000, that's the light blue that you see spread throughout, and development, it shows the development in 2000. And development is described as residential homes, commercial buildings, the parking lots, basically where the land has been developed. And in the 20 years since 2000, that dark blue shows the growth. And you can see that in those 2 decades, we added 4.5 square miles of developed land. The regional growth boundary, which is this red line, was created in 2000 by the elected officials with the purpose to preserve land and provide efficient use of infrastructure and public services, try to have that density to gain the efficiencies inside the regional growth boundary. The impact of climate change that we are expecting on land use is that this region is probably going to continue to grow. It's very likely to continue to grow. And we want to plan for it to be done sustainably. We know as we grow, there are traffic issues. So how do we get people out of their cars, living closer to where they work and where they play so that there's less traffic problems? Also, when you have all of that development, it means that there's more impervious surface, right? So with those extreme rain events, we're going to have that water running off of the impervious surface, and how do we better manage that so that it's more sustainable for our waterways and our community? As you saw on the previous map, there's 30 square miles of developed land. That's about 20% of our region. While our region is growing, it does have a multitude of green space. 49% of our land used in the center region is forested, and 26% is agriculture. And here I talk a little bit about the Center County and its farms and the values that it has to our economy. So lands And farmers and their land are an integral part of our community, and they're having to adapt to these changing weather patterns. They're experiencing sort of the super wet when we have these extreme rain events, there's intermittent droughts, and then these heat waves. So it's definitely more complicated. It adds stress to their crops, livestock, and workers. And here I will point out that the forest and the farms are integral and very part of the solution to being able to sequester that carbon by having healthy soils and sustainable management of the land. So those are some of the impacts, but we're also seeing that climate change and climate action is something people care about. Public advocacy for action has been growing. This map here is from the Yale program on climate change communication. They do, I'll say annually, these climate opinion maps. And this map shows the percent of adults in the US who think global warming has happened. It's 72%. And over here, you can see the ratings. In Center County, it's 73%. And I put this up here because it's important to understand that the majority of people think global warming is happening. And this map shows the percent of adults who support regulating CO2 as a pollutant. Even more people think it should be regulated. But the interesting thing is very few people talk about it. Only 35% of the adults in the US discuss global warming at least occasionally. I encourage you all to talk more to your neighbors, your coworkers, your community about climate change and help in the discussions, because the more we talk about it, the more we'll understand it and be prepared to take actions. So, based on what we're experiencing in Pennsylvania, the local elected officials believe it's prudent to start taking action. They began this process pretty much in 2018 and came up with an objective. Basically, we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to a changing climate. And the focus will be on pragmatic and fiscally responsible actions. I am kind of like the messenger tonight, but there's a lot of people that are actively involved in this. We have a Climate Action and Sustainability Committee that's comprised of the elected officials in our region. There's one from each of the municipalities that comprise of the center region. There's also a representative from Penn State and the school district board, because we really recognize that this is not an action that just local government needs to do. We need to work with our community partnerships. So this committee was newly formed in 2020, and previously there were elected officials working towards this, but because it's become such a priority, the committee was formed in January of 2020. To help with this process of creating a climate action and adaptation plan, in 2019, they supported the formation of a technical advisory group. The technical advisory group is shown here with representatives from Penn State, industry, agriculture, and local government. And the goal of this technical advisory group is to help assist and support CRPA, the Center Region Planning Agency, myself, and elected officials in the creation of a climate action and adaptation plan. We've met with subject matter experts since the fall of 2019, have had lots of conversations, and our goal is to complete a climate action and adaptation plan by the end of the summer. So we've completed a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and it's shown here based on 2016. We have 824,209 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent. And you can see that 67% of that comes from our building energy use. Pretty well split between residents and commercial. Transportation is the other significant source of our emissions. But we did also look at solid waste, agriculture and land management, and water. We've also identified climate goals. The goals were set by the 32 elected officials that are part of Center Region, and there's actually 4 of them, but the one that's shown here is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 45% by 2030, 80% by 2050, and that remaining 20% will offset with carbon offset projects. So these goals align with other ones that have been set in the region. State College Borough, Ferguson, and Harris have all passed resolutions with their goals. And then the state has climate action goals. And the purpose of all 4 of the goals that are identified is to support a community effort to bring long-term benefit to the region. It's recognized that this is not something local government can do alone. So, local government is considering many things in the creation of this climate action plan, and this is a sampling. There's many things that are being considered, but I'm not going to go through all of those. I just want to put them out to let you know some of the things that we're considering. And I'll give the example of this: improving energy efficiency in buildings. We know we need to reduce the amount of energy that's being used. And there's a lot of benefits to a more energy efficient building. If you recall, all those storms and power outages are a problem in our region. And so by having more energy efficient buildings will allow people to shelter in place longer. I'll also point out that we hope that we will look at our own local government operations first, and we are looking at renewable energy, sustainable land practices. Those are the types of things that local government should take the first step at and then show others in the community how it can be done. The last thing I point out about this slide is that there's a lot of additional benefits, co-benefits, besides just reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're hoping and wanting to have social equity, environmental justice, and we believe that a lot of this will reduce cost over the long term. And then finally, brings us to why we're here tonight about having community conversations. We're hoping that this promotes a better understanding of the purpose and motivation for the climate action and adaptation plan. We know it's important to build broader ownership throughout our community. And this is the first of hopefully more, and hopefully sometime in person conversations with our community. But it'll be important that everybody feels part of it as we go into the implementation phase. We're going to use the input from the survey, from the discussions tonight, from interviews with surveys, from stakeholders to guide decision-making and prioritization of the strategies that we plan to include in that climate action and adaptation plan. And then finally, by having these conversations and more of them, we believe it will prepare our community to build for the next phase. We'll be ready for implementation the more we can talk about it now, and we'll be more prepared for future emergencies. According to the study of the National Institute of Building Sciences, every dollar we spend today on protection will save $6 in disaster costs. So it makes sense to have these conversations and prepare our community. So thank you very much for your time. I want to point out that there are other communities across Pennsylvania working on climate action, and it will really benefit if we all join together and lead collectively to demonstrate that a sustainable community is good for the people, our economy, and the environment. So now I will turn it over to Lara to talk about breakout room instructions.
Great, thanks, Pam. Again, my name is Lara Fowler. I'm with Penn State Law, and it's the students who are taking my environmental mediation course this spring who are going to be facilitating this. We have 30 students. There's 2 people in each room. I think by maybe some miracle, I've managed to assign all my students to the right rooms and more or less evenly broken you out in the last 20 minutes. So if you, for some reason, drop off and come back, or if you are a student and you're in the wrong room, please let me know. I will, was trying to juggle things very quickly here. So in the breakout rooms, the goal is that I sent out an agenda that hopefully many of you got, but they have really 4 questions for you. What impacts are you seeing? What opportunities do you see? What messages do you want to share with your local officials? And then I'm looking for 3 messages you want to share back with the group as a whole. You have 45 minutes once I hit go, and the students have a variety of techniques to make sure that everybody has a chance to be heard. Pam, if you go back actually to the ground rules for the breakout rooms. So do ask that people are brief, but share your thoughts. Questions, feedback are welcome. We're not here to answer your questions, but to gather information. What we're going to do with that information, and we've actually also done a number of interviews with people, is to distill that down in a summary fashion and then report that back to the Council of Governments as they're thinking about the climate action and adaptation planning process. So again, if somebody says something and you really don't understand what they're saying, ask questions. You said this, what does this look like to you? The facilitators will also be doing that. They will be taking general notes. And again, I'm not asking them to report back everything that you cover. You can't do that because I've given them 2 minutes or less for the report back. So that's where at the end of the discussion, you're going to take 3 ideas that you guys want to make sure the rest of the group really shares. CNET has been recording this up until now. They're not recording the breakout sessions. And if you feel like, all right, there's really more ideas that I wanted to share, you can put them in chat. We will record that or take that down and share that as part of our summary. Or you can put additional ideas and thoughts via the survey. With that, I'm going to just double check the breakout rooms. Pam, did I miss anything there?
Nope, I think that's good. We just hope that you'll go to the breakout rooms and join us back for the report back at 7:45.
Right, so I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. There's a few people I have to go ahead and assign. You should automatically be moved to the room that you are in. And again, there's about 8 to 10 people in each room. So I'm going to open those rooms and facilitators, take it away.
Hi.
Hey, Akram.
Thank you for the speech. It was good.
Yeah. So far maybe we're in the extra room.
Yes.
I just realized, I was like, we're with CNET, but they're not recording. So she must have just put us in extra for now.
Hopefully they are not recording.
Right. Hopefully it's working for everybody else. Sorry, somebody sent me a chat direct message and I just saw it and I didn't know if I could do it now. Oh, I can't do it when I'm in this room because I can only chat with us. So we're on time so far. Seems to be good. We have 158 people.
Yeah, I think 10 people dropped when the breakout session started.
Yeah, I put you guys arbitrarily in a separate room because I was trying, do you want me to move you to a different breakout room?
It's up to you if you, I'm happy to just go, but I'm happy to be in a breakout room because I can help if they're, I'm going to listen.
Yeah. I'm going to move you, Pam, to the room with that Shivangi, I think, is in India. It's the middle of the night for her. So I'm going to move you into that room.
Okay.
Madison's in there taking notes. But,
okay. Perfect.
I've got to drop out of this room. So.
Do you think I should leave the room?
She will assign you, I think.
I think that can work, or I can always leave.
All right, welcome back. I'm glad everybody could hopefully ignore me popping from room to room. It's facilitating from place to place, and thanks for people's patience as people dropped off Zoom and got added back and got moved around, and a big thanks to the students facilitating this discussion. What we wanted to do now was to actually provide a chance for people to hear back. There were very different discussions. I think I was the only person who was dropping into all the different rooms. There were very different discussions going on in each room. And as I noted before we started this breakout session, the goal isn't to hear everything you talked about, but sort of we asked you to identify 3 things that you wanted the rest of the group to hear, knowing that the students were taking, that the facilitators were taking notes to try and capture the richness and the depth of the rest of that. Just to be contrary, I'm going to start a little bit backwards. I'm going to start with group 15 and work our way back. And so that's putting those in group 15 a little bit on the spot, but that would be Marissa and Noah. And then next up would be Joel and Maggie. So I'm just going to work our way backwards in number, just a very quick report back, again, a minute or 2, and then we'll open it up for general discussion and then make sure that we're done by 8:30. So go ahead, Marissa or Noah.
Yeah, thank you. A little unexpected, but I'm ready for it. So our group primarily talked about 3 things. The first was changes to development and use requirements in both residential and commercial properties and ownership systems. And one of the things we talked about in particular was homeowner associations as a barrier to individuals making green improvements to their own properties. Another topic we covered was immediate local impacts need to be paired with global or long-term impact planning. So for local impacts, things like solar, a very efficient energy source in the region, building management, increase of public transportation and other policy changes. And then perhaps for long-term impacts, participation in RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And our third major concern was handling water in the region, both how to handle stormwater and source water, as well as the changing rain patterns in the region, and perhaps focus on things like native planting, lawn care and grass reduction or replacement with native species, and also looking to maintain the high level of water quality currently available here.
Great, thanks, Noah. And again, we're going to go through this very, very quickly. Next up would be Maggie or Joel. Go ahead.
So our 3 things that we talked about many more, but we had the importance of education, and that includes like schooling and also just the public in general in different capacities. And then the second thing was figuring out ways to reach people who are not already participating in these conversations. And we thought about how to infuse commonality into our language. And then third, we wanted to prioritize things that have the most impact. And by that, I mean that development should be done in a way that has long-term results for the community. And that's all with the focus on like green space and heating and stormwater drainage and transportation, but things that the public can easily see a change being made in.
Great, thanks, Maggie. Next up would be Mackenzie and Indira, and after that, Rashika and Grace.
So the main 3 things that we wanted to report back is we talked a lot about zoning and how local government can change zoning laws to prevent things like urban heat islands, to create cleaner buildings, more green buildings. The other thing we talked about was the use of plastic and how people don't always talk about plastics when it comes to climate change, and maybe how we can stop using plastic as much, or what the local government can do to help with plastics. And the last thing we talked about a lot was preservation of green spaces. So similar to talked about before, we talked about lawns and gardening and just preserving the green spaces around here, because that really helps sequester carbon and helps with the climate effects and helps with things like the urban heat islands that we talked about.
Great, thanks so much, Mackenzie. And next up would be Grace or Rashika.
Our concerns were very similar to what Noah has mentioned. We also spoke about the need to improve the agricultural techniques in order to maintain the green space. The other thing that we spoke about is planting of more trees in order to, maintain the green space. The other key issue that we highlighted was the necessity to improve the public transportation sector, and in order to up the number of transportation options that we have. This included maybe increasing the number of buses that are plying on the road. This would help in reducing the number of private vehicles that people own. The need to improve the biking trail infrastructure, having connected pathways, and also electric charging stations. That is something that we decided to focus on. And the third issue that was highlighted is that increased revenues or utilization of the funding that we have to implement the necessary changes and infrastructure projects that are required. For instance, with regard to Mr. Smith had mentioned that we had apparently there are rainwater management plans, stormwater management plans in place, but they need to be implemented, for which maybe better implementation of the revenue and the funding is necessary.
Great, thanks, Rishika. And you are starting to hear some repetitive themes in here, but I wanted to make sure that each group had a chance to have their 3 points made, so just keep going through it. Next up would be Jennifer Gerardo, and then after that, Aaron and Shivangi.
Gerardo, are you gonna?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about a lot of things. We talked about urgency to transportation, better public transportation, and using electrical buses and electrical school buses first, which is much easier for process. We also talked about land use needs to be responsible, and buildings need to be built with the environment in mind. And we also talked about the need to make sure the local government is communicating effectively to keep the message from the center. And how do you make people more engaged?
Great, thanks, Gerardo. Aaron and Shivangi.
So we talked about a lot of issues, like suppose standardizing as temperature, energy within housing, and like regulating solar panels so that there is a less wastage of energy. So we talked about local infrastructure, how home energy recovery system does help a lot of energy conservation. And on the level of education, how Penn State can help as, as in a climate change impact. And on education level, how young people can help in energy conservation, approaching development from an environmental issue, and building within the regional growth boundaries. So there are different issues that we discussed through the session. And mainly the three aspects that we discussed about as a solution towards the end was education, sprawl, and energy. So education is like, as far as the education is concerned, the next generation of the students who are as current change makers, we all can like help in improving and doing a lot of better through the deepening knowledge and awareness, wherein we were suggested that like as of now, as present, the Penn State undergrad students have taken the pressure to kind of divert from the fossil fuel consumption. So that's a major thing. Then secondly, building within the land development boundaries and ensuring that there's a water equality for all in the sprawl is the second thing that we were focusing upon as a solution. And the third being that focusing on energy efficiency in building codes for new buildings and creating incentives for all the retrofitting old buildings to be more efficient and to ensure that there is a less wastage of energy. Thank you.
I would also like to add real quick, just because I'm seeing it become very popular in chat at the moment, is we also were discussing the plastic bag issue. So if you just want to track how many people have talked about that now, we were also talking about that.
Great, thanks Shivangi, thanks Aaron. Emma and Linda, and then following that, Dominic and Miranda. Go ahead, Emma and Linda.
Absolutely. So our three issues that we were focusing on was first and foremost informing the public as to who is in charge, who has what power, and what can be done so that we can focus our energy on people who actually have the ability to make change. The second thing was transportation, cohesiveness of the bike paths, and sorry, my cat, and making sure that everyone has access to energy efficient public transportation and parking through the university. And the third thing was incentives for landlords and business owners and building owners to increase their energy efficiency and kind of taking that pressure off of the people who are leasing from them and rather putting the pressure on to the people who are in charge of the buildings.
Great, thanks. Dom, Miranda?
Our three big takeaways were improving climate change curriculum in our classrooms, encouraging discussions about climate change. Our second one was, we asked, what consumption do we engage in? What sacrifices can we make for the environment and the greater good? And lastly, we talked about the intersection between poverty and the opportunities for efficiency, agriculture, and sustainability.
Great, thanks. That was very quick. Claire and Helen, followed then by Hannah and Carlos. Claire and Helen.
Hi there. Yeah, we discussed the role of ordinances and zoning rules in creating barriers to sustainable development. So that's been addressed a little bit here. Again, we discussed the role of government as an information broker and disseminator, and the importance of government, local governments especially, acting where difficult decisions need to be made. And we had a pretty fascinating discussion of power dynamics and how we make sure that people who are vulnerable or less represented or generally economically disenfranchised, how we make sure that they get heard and we make sure that their interests are protected.
Great, thank you. How about next, Carlos and Hannah Blasek?
Yeah, well, we talk about many things. Overall, for the 3 points or the 3 messages they wanted to tell, one issue is about the draining along the roadway, and this comes along with the increase in the number of weather events. So also, besides that, there was the equity in kind of a broad sense. For example, the reduction on the CARA service and the home heating, that it will be great to have some information about whether this state program or anything have local incentives to this type of things, because also another thing is the municipal officials need some training on what good governance principles are. And the third one is that in order to take good actions, we need positive examples in everything. People don't know it unless they have seen it. So these are barely the 3 things that we want to tell.
Great, thanks, Carlos. Next up is Brittany and Poref Bazar, followed by Bettina and Madeline.
Hi, to save time, again, a lot of ours has been said. Only new would be a lot of focus on affordable housing, the need of more of it, and specifically local affordable housing, and education-specific initiatives, again, on community education, on not only the effects of climate change, but which actions would host the largest impact in mitigating the effects, as well as agricultural specific initiatives, for example, and examples of how to help the agricultural sector, such as like how to apply for grants and programs that they don't already have.
Thanks, Brittany. Next up, Bettina or Madeline, followed by Shannon or Bendu.
Yeah, our group talked about a lot of topics, but boiling it down to just the 3 they wanted to communicate. The first was that they wanted to make sure that there's a plan in place of addressing the possibility that there may be a large number of climate refugees entering the center region in the next couple years, specifically people who are escaping harsh climate impacts that may be more severe in other areas than what we're seeing in center region. Secondly, that the local government should integrate the climate action and planning efforts in all aspects of their development, and then be clear in demonstrating their environmental considerations in urban planning, and overall serving as leaders in meeting the region's sustainable goals. And then thirdly, that the local government should improve their communication to the community members with education and outreach. And this includes guidance to local community members as to how they can act more sustainably.
Great, thanks. We're ticking through it. I think just 3 more groups. Shannon or Bendu, go ahead.
Our group talked about many things, but the two we had the most consensus on was first, the availability of climate action items, and second, education, and that it is only with like government to the local populace and educating about the different things that are available.
Great, thanks. Emma, you've got your hand up. Do you want to add more?
Sorry, I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge the fact that we had 2 undergraduate students in our group who had so much to contribute. And I also just want to make it clear to all of the people who, you know, are career people, and just encourage that the students are here and they do want to get involved and they do want to, you know, make a difference. So, and I think that's really important and very respectable. So.
Great, thanks. Hannah and Katie.
Okay, so our group, we talked about a whole lot. As other groups have mentioned, we also would like to see more green infrastructure, for example, planting more trees, increasing the urban tree canopy, and converting vacant spaces and parking lots to green spaces to collect runoff. We also talked about how we would love to see more incentives for homeowners, landlords, and builders to have more efficient heating and cooling systems. And finally, we also talked about how we're thrilled with the efforts that Center Region has made in increasing biking opportunities in the region. So we'd like to see those continue, and we would also like to see increased bike safety education programs and possibly having bike routes that would parallel Atherton to encourage people to bike more, but safely.
Last but not least, group number 1, I put you last, but Chris and Angelica. And then my warning to all of you as facilitators is I'm going to ask you to think about issues that might have come up in your group, but that you haven't heard. We'll bring that up, and then I'm going to raise this as an open discussion for all. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for a great discussion. This is by no means entirely exhaustive, but we talked a lot about education within the community, from the community up, a lot at the school level. So not just educating the community about the climate impacts, but within the education system, sort of developing maybe different purchasing contracts about materials used. That was specifically mentioned. And then moving on from that, there was a lot of discussion about signaling. So maybe from the government or different bodies, private or public, showing the community that there really is a unified front on these issues, and that the government and other communities are serious about dealing with them. And this maybe that takes the form in a concrete sense with financing benefits for sustainability, and also, as people mentioned, zoning. Specifically, there was a lot of discussion, this is number 3, it kind of ties in with ecological impacts as related to the growth boundary and increasing waters, increasing heat that's affecting flower cycles, as well as agriculture. And just to highlight really one of our biggest things, there was a tiny conflict between how do you approach this? Is this from the government down, or are you going to do this in the community? And then the government will take that, communication from the community and then put things in action. So thank you.
Great, thanks. So turning this to the facilitators first, thank you for those quick recaps of a lot of complex discussions that were taking place in each breakout group. Are there other topics that came up that you didn't hear covered in the recap? So that's my first question. And then again, my question to everybody, a close conversation about this with 140 of your closest friends. Are there other topics that you are thinking about that you haven't heard raised? So facilitators first, anything else that we haven't talked about yet in this recap?
Yeah, our group had one specifically talking about how there are a lot of townships and that not always the benefits that one township have, another township will have. So specifically, they were talking about composting and how that's only available to State College Township, and people who are outside or just like one street away from that township boundary don't actually have the information and readily available ways to compost. So just basically intergovernmental collaboration to make those sorts of sustainable benefits available to the larger community.
Great, thanks. Other topics that might have come up. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't see a way to raise my hand. One point that was emphasized in my group was the need for early involvement by the citizens, which was a natural corollary to the need for the local government to be transparent. That was something that we talked about quite a bit.
Great. So I'm seeing Hannah, and then Chris, and then Rashika, and then Linda.
Yes, that, something additionally that was brought up in this group number 2 was rethinking zoning regulations and the importance of trying to build up rather than continue to sprawl out.
Great, thanks. Chris?
Yeah, so there are some other things, but specifically in regards to transportation, which was a hot topic, there is some emphasis on sort of trains, specifically with Amtrak, whether that's going to be built up within the country and whether that's going to create an alternative transportation aside from, cars and all that that can help with CO2 emissions.
Great, thanks. There's quite a bit of chat going on right now, and I'd ask actually to stay focused on what the facilitators are covering, and we will then open it up more broadly. I've got Rashika and then Linda. Rashika, go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. One thing that was spoken of in our group, it was brought forth by Mr. Nains, and he had spoken about political involvement, how the politicians should come to the forefront and, take active steps in dealing with the climate change issues, because considering they are the decision makers and they are the ones responsible for allocation of the budget, their active involvement in spreading awareness and also taking action is very imperative, and that how opportunities should be seized immediately, considering we are seeing a transition to the renewable and green energy. And so what was spoken of is that immediate action is warranted so that opportunities can be seized as they are available now.
Great, thanks, Rashika. Linda and then Erin, and then we'll open it wide open. Go ahead, Linda.
So one of the things that we circled around was how can we enact change? And specifically, the group was thinking that if we want to enact change, then we have to take the mantra to be the progressive one. So they wanted the Center region to be sort of the model, if you will, for other regions in terms of climate action. And so that was one of the things that they felt that it's needed. And also in order to do that, they thought that there's some sort of dysfunctionality between the municipalities and the Center region itself. Like there's a way of overlapping and things are not as cohesive as they should. So I think we need some clarity there so that we can be progressive and functional. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Erin and then Podef Bazar, go ahead.
Yeah, something that was brought up that I just, I hadn't personally considered and I thought was a great point was biking paths and walking paths. I know that's been mentioned in the chat and I think it was mentioned very briefly, but just the current desire to have more of both of those by people so they could get around without using traditional forms of transportation and therefore have a lower energy footprint. That was something that was brought up in our group, as well as safety aspects, because we think of the energy aspect, but someone was speaking about trying to walk to a local farm and there's a blind corner and she felt unsafe. So I think having more access to these kind of energy efficient transportation modes would be something that we should keep in mind.
Okay, thanks. Podef Bazar?
Just quickly, but just what I found very interesting was early blooming of the flowers and the trees, and then how it affects the agricultural stuff, and then but also because of the temperature increase, river temperature, and then changing the river oxygen level, and then how it affects the fishes and creatures and their habits, and that is what I found very interesting for me.
Great, thanks, and a big thanks to all the students for summarizing what you heard in the groups and also adding to that. I do want to open it up. And again, the purpose of this forum is not necessarily to solve issues or to sort them out. It's to identify issues. And one of the things I think that we're, and I'm looking at Pam as I'm saying this, trying to figure out what are the next steps for other additional engagement. So I'm seeing discussion about biking and transportation. I'm seeing a discussion about what's happening in terms of composting. Again, we're not trying to sort that out or figure out what has happened in the past, just as tagging issues and sort of saying, what needs to be talked about in the future. Raising it, I see Susan and probably Tony, both Buddha raising their hand. If you've got questions or ideas or thoughts that haven't been raised, you can type them in the chat, you can raise your hand. We're gonna run this discussion for a little bit, and then at about 8:20, we'll wrap up and tell you what's going to happen next with all of this information. So raising hands is probably the best way to do it, and I can keep track of that. Susan or Tony, go ahead.
Yes, so one thing I haven't heard, but I think is worth considering is that in the EU and in Britain and elsewhere, I've seen citizens climate assemblies as ways of getting community involvement on climate issues to address the climate problem. This is kind of a democratic way of getting a representative swath of the center region, let's say, together. We're kind of doing this in the affordable housing space, but not exactly a citizens assembly approach. But you know, I've heard a lot of mention of we need more education, we need better communication with the public, and I think these kinds of fora like these are great. But I don't think we have the entire community represented here, and so just in a consideration is that there are ways of getting folks engaged from all across the community, of people who maybe have concerns about affordable housing, maybe have concerns about, you know, resilience or things, waste, whatever the issues are. And this is one way that you can raise up possible solutions from the ground up to your government officials that could work locally. I mean, there's not a lot of things we have control over. Some emissions we don't really have good control over, but there are things we can do locally. And sometimes these solutions can come from the community.
Great, thanks, Tony, appreciate that. Michaela, go ahead.
One of the things that we discussed were much more well, not more frequent, but in fact, to begin serious PSAs, public service announcements to educate the public and also to press legislators and the community to actually make some serious changes, potentially to have required audits of existing and new homes, sustainability audits like Infinity does now. Perhaps there are other groups as well, to actually bring everything up to be as energy efficient as possible, homes. I'm hoping that we can renew our plastic ban that we tried so hard to get passed a year or two ago. Plastic bans, a ban of Roundup and pesticides that we know enter the water and the air and the land that are, you know, that are so destructive to our health. And so those are 3 issues.
Great, thanks, Michaela, for raising those. I have Astrid and then Michelle and then Matt and maybe some others. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. I agree with the idea to increase the awareness and the information around climate topics. And especially, I think it's important to remark, for example, some international events like in the United Nations Food System Summit and how these could impact small farmers in PA and in other places, and what kind of decisions are discussing there, but also which kind of decisions are discussing in international meetings like the United Nations climate meetings that actually also discuss about those solutions related to carbon markets that could be really a risk in the future if we don't examine well what could be the impacts about the climate solutions. So are these real solutions, are not real solutions? I think it's interesting to start discussing also about that.
Great, thank you, Astrid. Thanks for sharing. Michelle and then Matt. Go ahead, Michelle.
So in our group, we had 3 themes. One was about affordable housing, the other was about the role of agriculture, and then this idea of a carbon offset. So affordable housing has to be centrally located and energy efficient. That reduces carbon emissions from commuting, but it also reduces carbon emissions from energy use. And it reduces pressure on our ag lands so they are not developed for more housing use. That allows that land to be used for carbon sequestration purposes. If you look at Drawdown, you'll see a lot of ideas in Drawdown about agriculture and forestry and land use as a way to sequester our carbon emissions. But you got to pay for it. So a carbon offset fund, a local carbon offset fund, would allow us to make those investments in our local farms and help our farming community so that they can sequester carbon, but we could also finance local renewable energy projects, and we can finance energy efficiency retrofits for low-income families to further reduce their carbon emissions and help them save money on their energy bills. So a systems approach to think about the interactions between solutions so we can optimize on multiple dimensions would be great.
Great. Thanks, Michelle, for sharing that. Matt?
Sure. Yeah, so lots of great discussion on like biking and walking infrastructure here. I certainly would love to see State College get to the point where, you know, my kids can literally bike or walk around town without fear of being killed by automobiles. One other thing that I think we discussed in my little group, but it hasn't come out of the big group, is that local government does control regulations that require minimum amounts of new parking to be built with new buildings. We could eliminate those. We could even set parking maximums instead of parking minimums. That would make housing more affordable because it costs money to make parking lots. It would make it so people who are able to live car-free can save more money, and it would also reduce runoff and wasted land use. And this is something that like our local government has control of. So I hope to figure out who we need to talk to actually make them make that change and then, you know, make it. Because it's happening. There's literally a new development a few blocks from me that is trying to take over a park and turn it into a parking lot. And what if they just didn't make the parking lot? They wouldn't have to do that. They could just make the development, have people live here, make it cheaper, make it better. So I hope that I can figure out a way to get people on board with this.
Great, Matt, thank you for that. Are there others who want to raise, and again, the chat has been quite active. I'm not going to try and recap that. People can read faster than I can talk. But are there others who would like to raise a point that's not yet been covered here in the discussion? Joan, go ahead.
We didn't have that much of discussion of infrastructure for electric buses and electric school buses. And this is something that would really help the carbon situation here, and as well as the student health, the university students on CATA end and the school students from the State College school system on the school bus end. So something that's really important.
Great, thanks, Joan. Lachlan, you've got your hand up, go ahead.
One last thought, just as a totally free thing that we could do is, I wish that whenever local government was communicating with the public, so this is like the, you know, township newsletters and on the COG website and things, just having our sustainability efforts be front and center in all of our communications to residents, I think would make a huge difference. Because before getting involved with Center Sustains, I had no idea that we had a sustainability coordinator and that we were taking real actions. And I think it would just make people feel so much more as part of a, you know, community that's all taking action if whenever the government is communicating with us, that was included as a kind of front and center topic.
Great, thanks, Lachlan. And I'm going to do a shout out to Lachlan because he actually designed and put together the website, the Center Sustains website, helping translate a whole lot of government speak into as plain language as possible. And so all of our communications about this forum actually headed through that. So Lachlan, a big shout out to your work on that. Very much appreciated. Mark, final comment, and then we're going to, Pam and I are going to wrap it up and tell you kind of what's going to happen next. Mark, go ahead.
Sure, thanks. I think it would be really interesting if State College could develop some community solar initiatives or wind initiatives where people in the community can pitch in to buy and install solar that would provide energy that we could sell back to the grid. And in general, I think the community renewables idea is something that the municipality could advance. That might involve some legal work to make that possible, but I think it would be fascinating.
Great, thanks, Mark. So we have about 10 minutes left. So what's going to happen next? If you have additional ideas or additional thoughts, do go ahead and share them in the chat. And what we will do, what we as a class, you've actually heard from, again, we have 30 students who've been taking this environmental mediation course. We are going to gather the thoughts and feedback from this forum. We've also interviewed quite a few people. I think we may have a little bit more capacity to interview people, not a lot, but if you really, really want to talk to a student, please reach out to me. I will share my email in the chat here in just a moment, or you've probably all heard from me along with this. And I mean, kind of doing the summary and next steps. Pam, I'm not sure you have to show this so we can actually see everybody. But we're going to summarize all of the information that we've heard in pretty short form, not sharing names and sort, you know, we're not going to say so-and-so said this. We're going to say, hey, these are the types of issues that we have heard from these discussions. We are going to then give that as a report back to the Council of Governments. And Pam is the primary keeper of that, and sort of hand that off. I think, Pam, go ahead and talk about what you guys are going to work on next then.
Yes, and I see in the chat somebody asked if the recording to this event will be online, and it will be. It's through CNET. It will be available. We'll try to figure out how to get that information out to you, but CNET is recording it as well. So as far as what's next, if you haven't taken the sustainability survey, please do that. It's available on that site. On that website that Lachlan created, and I put in the website centersustains.com. And again, I want to thank Lachlan also. They did a great job in creating that information for us, but there's a link there to register for the survey, to take the survey. There's also a link there to get on a mailing list, and I'll be sending out newsletters. Not a lot, but on a regular basis to keep you updated so that you'll be able to get the report. If you're interested, it will be housed on that website, centersustains.com, as well as the survey results. The next step is taking all of this information that has happened over the months and years and finishing a climate action and adaptation plan report that will be presented at public meetings at the municipalities and to the elected officials, and ultimately adopted ideally by the end of the summer. So again, that's another time and place when you can get engaged with your elected officials, with your community and people that you know, to let the elected officials know that this is important to you. So we have the website, the plan. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Center Regional Planning to keep abreast of what's happening and how the process is moving forward. The implementation phase will begin. There will be more conversations, and as Laura sort of mentioned, you know, having a conversation just focused on land use, just focused on transportation. Sustainable transportation is probably a good way to keep things going. And then I really encourage you all to have those conversations with people in your community to keep this growing and this conversation going so that we can continue to make changes and be moving things forward. So that is, I think, all that I was planning to say. Did I miss anything, Laura?
No, I think I would reiterate what Pam is just said earlier, and what Jim said earlier as well, is this is meant to be a part of a conversation, but not the only piece of a conversation. And as somebody who teaches mediation, negotiation, and dispute resolution, one of the reasons that I volunteered my class for this was the real need to have in-depth conversations about a whole bunch of different topics. And I do want to give a round of applause to the students who are facilitating. For many of them, this is the first time they've ever facilitated anything like this. Of course, we were doing this in the time of COVID. So very early on, we realized that we would have to do this online. And so inviting a couple hundred people to have a conversation online is a little bit, takes some work. So a huge shout out also to Pam and her colleagues at the Center Council of Governments. But again, we're going to be working with her to follow up very short as the semester wraps to a close. But I think it is an open opportunity to think about what other discussions need to take place in our community associated with these topics. So I think with that, we'll actually give you 5 minutes back. Again, round of applause to all the students. This is your chance to practice your reactions You can throw a party, you can send them some love with hearts, thumbs up if you haven't played with Zoom reactions, but a big thank you to all of you for taking the time, for participating. Everyone's got a ton on their plate. This is the evening hours. We know it's the end of the semester, but a big thanks for joining us. And with that, I think we will wrap it up for this evening, and happy to follow up otherwise. Thanks so much. For students, if you can make sure you have downloaded the chat that you might have gotten from your breakout rooms before we shut the meeting down, that would be great.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank you.
Great job.
Thank you. Awesome.